Earlier this summer, my family and I went canoe camping up in the Adirondacks, and it was wonderful. We were laughing and singing in the boats under these clear blue skies, and it was just fantastic. At least for the first day. The second day, we caught some rain, and then some more rain, made camp in the rain, woke up the third morning, more rain. We were soaked, our gear was muddy, and there was no prospect of any of these things changing anytime soon. We called it quits. And we were lugging our stuff from the camp down to the edge of the Raquette River to make the final soggy leg of our journey to go home. And I was walking carrying a canoe on my head and bags in my arms, and I was grumbling that the weather clearly had a personal vendetta against us. Our kids weren't doing nearly enough to help. My wife had packed enough food for an entire army division. Now I had to carry it all and grumble, grumble, grumble. I had enough good sense, I thought, to keep it all in my head and not let all of my negativity come spilling out. But then my eldest kid came over to me and put their hand on my shoulder in that reassuring way that is exactly what I do when I want to tell my kids that I love them before I tell them that they're screwing something up. And they said, "Hey, Dad, you know how you're always telling me and Abe that the number one rule of camping trips is no whining, no complaining? You're being a bissel for bissena. So why don't you stop huffing and puffing and do what you always tell us to do? If you have something to say it. If not, please stop with all the huffing and puffing because you're just bumming everybody out." I found it more than a little bit humbling to realize that I'd spent all these years studying Torah in the hopes that it would help me become a better person. And here I was being taken to school by my teenager, in Yiddish, no less. And the worst part was, of course, that they were completely, absolutely, 100% right. I was using silence as a weapon. Perhaps some of you are familiar with this technique. It involves making sure that the people around me know that I'm unhappy without ever saying, "Hey, I'm unhappy." I let them know by the way I glower, by the way I put a bag down with just a little too much force, the petulant tone I use to spit out answers to any question that comes my way. The genius of this approach is that the silence gives me plausible deniability. If anyone dares to actually ask me, "Hey, what's wrong?" I can spit out nothing. I didn't say anything. Thankfully, my 14-year-old could see through this absurd alibi. If I'm half as mature as I like to think I am, I might not have needed my kid's invitation to simply say, "Look, I'm bummed out from all this rain, my shoulders hurt from carrying all this gear, and none of this has anything to do with you." But I didn't. At least not until they invited me to. When my emotional manipulation game is on point, I make everyone guess what they are doing to me to make me unhappy, without owning up to the ways that I am the agent of my own unhappiness. We all are, even as many of us endure hard, difficult, and even horrifying things. It's easy enough to get into a conflict, to stew in bitter silence, but it takes presence of mind and real maturity to step away from it. The rest of our paddling journey was indeed soggy and muddy, but much better than it seemed like it was going to be that morning, because while I brought the attitude of a petulant teenager, my actual teenager brought some emotional maturity and gave me the opportunity to get my own head screwed on straight. The great Hasidic master, Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, teaches, "Ki shalom talui b'dat u'machloket hu hefech ladat." Peace is dependent on dat, on self-awareness, while dispute stems from the opposite of self-awareness. Self-awareness is a funny thing. It's the habit of looking at how we are looking. If I look out a window at the tree, I might notice its color, the shape of its leaves, the sway of its branches in the wind. But I might also notice the window itself, the beads of dew drying on the glass, that spider web up in the corner, the way the frame highlights some things and obscures others. Self-awareness, or dat, which Rabbi Nachman teaches is the foundation of peace, involves recognizing that we have no control over what happens to us, the things that happen outside the window of our consciousness. But we might have some ability to affect how we perceive things through the window, to be aware of what we are choosing to highlight and what we are choosing to obscure, even if it doesn't feel like a choice at all. I certainly wasn't aware of choosing to be Fabisana that soggy morning, at least not until my kid helped me choose a different path. Fabisana is just being petulant, moody, negative, able to see the cloud in any silver lining. But I didn't choose to be Fabisana that morning, at least not consciously. It's not so easy to choose a different path, and it's particularly difficult in our relationships when we feel like we're not safe. In his groundbreaking work on emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman taught of the dangers of amygdala hijacking, those moments when the most ancient part of our brain, the part that is excellent at perceiving danger and asking, do I eat it or does it eat me, takes over and squeezes out any other ability our mind might have. When our amygdala takes over, we're no longer asking if we are in danger. We know that we are in danger, and we're only asking if we should fight or flee or freeze. It's very, very hard for us to engage our dat, our self-awareness, under the best of circumstances, and particularly when we're in moments of conflict. In 1988, two of the most important rabbis of the day, Yitz Greenberg and Meir Kahane, debated the future of Israel. Kahane, who founded the now outlawed but actually still very powerful Kach party in Israel, argued that following the Holocaust, Judaism must be muscular and demanding and could not afford to take any risks. If there is even one Arab in the country who refuses to accept the status that we give to him, he argued, that Arab must go. Greenberg argued just the opposite, saying our Zionist dream has been fulfilled. We have come back to the land of Israel and built a state, but there is a population there and they are human beings, and we must take risks for peace. This tension between the risks of defense and the risks of openness is the animating tension of Jewish life, at least since the Holocaust. If it's helpful to think of it this way, it's also the animating tension of the XMen comics, which not incidentally were written by post-Holocaust Jews. In that superhero universe, the Nazis targeted mutants as well as Jews, and in the aftermath of the Holocaust, Magneto carries Kahane's banner, saying that mutants can never trust humans and must be prepared to fight them with power and strength, while Professor X, confined to a wheelchair, uses the enhanced power of his mind to argue that if we are brave enough to face our own fears, we can come to a place of trust and understanding, even with those who would be our enemies. But you don't have to be a mutant superhero to address conflict directly and maturely. You just have to have a level of courage that not all of us have. Among those in our tradition who lack that courage are the 12 sons of Jacob. Now, a quick refresher on the story. These 12 sons hated their brother Joseph, he of the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. In fact, they hated him because of that amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. That coat was the embodiment of Jacob's love for Joseph, a connection that he didn't have with any of his other children. I know that feeling. Maybe you do too. That feeling of not being loved, of not being recognized, of being taken for granted. That resentment can eat us alive from the inside And that's exactly what it did to the 12 brothers. When the brothers saw that Jacob loved Joseph more than he loved any of them, they hated him. Velo yuchlu dabru leshalom. They could not speak to him peace. This would seem to be precisely the sort of behavior that the Rambam, the most important of the medieval Jewish philosophers, was urging against when he taught, when a person feels they have been wronged, they should not hate the offender and keep silent. It is their duty to talk directly to the offender and ask, "Why did you do this to me?" If the brothers had been able to speak to Joseph, they might have told him of their anger at his dreams and the stories he told, indicating his sense of superiority. They might have shared their distress at seeing that multicolored coat. They might have talked about the sense of humiliation when it was so clear that their father Jacob loved Joseph's mother, Rachel, more than he loved their mother Leah, a favoritism that now was continuing to the second generation. If the brothers were more courageous, or just simply more mature, they might have taken ownership of their feelings and invited Joseph to respond with integrity. We own our feelings, or our feelings own us. It takes courage to operate with that level of integrity, in no small part because there's no guarantee that the person with whom you're speaking will be willing or able to meet you there. The brothers didn't speak. They tried to win. Perhaps the brothers thought they had won this conflict because they had thrown Joseph into a pit and sold him into slavery. And maybe Joseph was down there in the bottom of the pit thinking he had won, because even there being sold into slavery, he enjoyed the love of their father far more than his brothers ever would. The hard truth, though, is that at least with relationships that matter, winning is for losers. What is it that we win exactly when we win a conflict with a loved one? There's a small moment of frisson when we hear those magic words. Okay, you're right. But then what? Do we get a trophy saying I won an argument with my spouse, my child, my parent? We actually win when we can transform conflict into connection, something that is not so easy to do. But this, I think, is exactly what the author of Mishlei, the author of Proverbs, had in mind when they wrote, Ochar beto yanchel ruach. One who troubles their own house inherits the wind. What if the brothers had been able to say, hey, we feel lousy that our father seems to love you so much more than he loves any of us. Seeing you in that coat makes us feel like dirt. What if they had named their own feelings without attack or accusation? There's no way of knowing what could have happened. But I'd like to imagine that Joseph might have responded with concern for these brothers that he loved and even looked up to. But lo yachlu dabro leshalom. They simply couldn't bring themselves to speak. As Nachmanides, the Ramban, teaches, those who hate tend to hide their hate in their hearts. Certainly when it comes to our relationships and the dynamic and tension within our relationships, those who hate tend to hide their hate in their hearts. Conversation does not in and of itself resolve conflict. Two people who are open with each other may still have clashing desires or competing claims. They simply may not like one another. There's no law that guarantees that there will be harmony and love in human affairs. But conversation means we recognize each other's humanity, which is no small feat when conflict emerges. At its best, conversation allows us to engage in role reversal, seeing the world from the other's point of view. Think of how many real conflicts in our lives and even in the world might be transformed if we could simply talk in such a way that recognized the reality of points of view other than our own. In the end, Joseph and his brothers had to live through real trauma, bondage, imprisonment, famine, before they were able to recognize each other's humanity. Our Talmudic sages were eloquent in speaking about the dangers of Lashon Hara, evil speech, the power of language to fracture relationships and destroy trust and goodwill. But there is evil silence as well as evil speech. Joseph's brothers were unable to speak to him peace, and so communication and connection broke down at the very moment when it was needed the most. Words create and words reveal. Words redeem. Words can be the narrow bridge across the abyss between one person and another. Words, language can be a pathway to connection, and connection is what redeems our solitude. Connection is what mends broken relationships. However painful it is to speak our hurt, however limited language is as a tool to actually convey our pain, it is far more harmful to stew in silence. Had they the courage and the maturity to speak their pain, Joseph and his brothers might have reconciled much early and spared themselves and their father and their descendants much grief. I have no doubt that we as a nation, as a community, as families and as individuals will experience moments of fear this year, moments when we are pained, moments when our amygdala takes over and pushes our dot, our self-awareness, to the side. In those moments, I pray that I and all of us remember Hashalom talui b'dat. Peace depends on self-awareness. In those inevitable moments, may we have the courage and maturity to reveal our pain in language so as to perhaps heal our pain and heal our relationships. Shana Tova.